So yeah, Emily, just if you can just set some context for us and talk to your professional background before you started Evergreen.
Yeah, it's truly the surprise of my professional career that I'm sitting here wearing a sweatshirt that smells like maple syrup and making waffles and pancakes for a living. I graduated from Harvard Law School almost 11 years ago. Planned to be a corporate lawyer for my whole career, but very long story short, had my now 7-year-old daughter. She's my oldest. And, I was working a lot. I was a mom who aspired to make her breakfast from scratch every day, but also wasn't naive enough to think I was actually going to have the time or the energy to do so. So I knew I needed something like a frozen waffle. I didn't want to feed her that brand in a yellow box for obvious reasons, probably. And so I went to my local health food store and started flipping around kind of the boxes of the quote unquote better for you waffles at the time. This was 2018. And to my dismay, once I actually started reading the ingredients list, realized like they're all kind of like that brand in the yellow box. I had to Google a bunch of things to figure out what it was. There didn't seem to be very much nutritional content in there. And so I decided instead of settling that I would buy a mini waffle iron, which I actually have right next to me still. This is the OG. I bought a mini waffle iron from Amazon and I decided I would make kind of big batches of waffles on Sundays and put them in a Ziploc bag and stick them in the freezer. And so what I did was I opened my fridge and my pantry and I pulled out the most nutritiously dense ingredients I could find, kind of whole veggies, whole fruits, 100% whole grains. I used maple syrup as my sweetener, used avocado oil, and I threw that all into a blender to make our batter. And that's kind of how I started making the waffles. And for the first year of my daughter's kind of solid eating life, that is what she had for breakfast. We would pull them out of the freezer, stick them in the microwave or the toaster. They were ready a couple minutes later. And I just kind of sat back after that year and reflected on A, she loved these waffles. She devoured them. B, it made my life so much easier to know that they were always on hand for me in the freezer. And C, it made me feel so much better. I was working a ton. I already had plenty of mom guilt that I was dealing with, but to know that I was giving her something she loved and that was actually good for her just made everything better. And so I decided, I'm probably not the only one out there to want something like it, and set off on this wild journey to try to figure out with, zero CPG background, as you said, how to get a product on a grocery store shelf. So fast forward,
And
8 years from.
what year was this when you first started experimenting, and how long did you stay in that period where you were making the waffles just for your family? What did
Yeah.
that look like?
So started making the waffles for our family in late 2018, and then launched into retail second week of March 2020. So
Good
another
time.
fun detail. Yeah. But no, for a long time was making them just for us, and then once I decided that there are probably other moms out there looking for something similar, got dropped down to part-time at work. So I was still working as a lawyer 3 days a week. On the other 2 days, started trying to move this forward ever so slowly, but got certified to work out of a shared commercial kitchen, hired our first branding agency to make packaging. Our first waffles were and are still our original line. Our mini waffles are in a stand-up resealable bag because I was making these out of a shared commercial kitchen, and I was like, how the heck am I supposed to seal a carton? I knew obviously waffles typically came in a carton, but I was like, I don't know how to get that closed. But I figured I could buy like a $25 heat sealer on Amazon and figure out how to seal a bag. So I started making waffles out of a shared commercial kitchen in late 2019. I could make 46 bags of waffles in a day, like a full day. Basically no waffles, but I worked really hard at it. And then I would take those waffles and put them in a duffel bag with my household toaster and go around to corner stores in Chicago, basically walk in and say, hi, my name's Emily. I make waffles. I think they'd sell great here. I have my toaster. Can I plug it in and heat you up some waffles? Much to my surprise, everybody said sure. And that's how we got our first few accounts. And then after
Yeah.
that, I think I had this inflated sense of confidence from getting into our first accounts and sent a cold email to Whole Foods asking if I could drop them off samples. They said sure. A couple weeks later, got an email back saying we love these, we'd love to bring them in, and the rest is history.
Wow. So when did the Whole Foods launch happen? Was that in 2020? Was that March of
That
2020?
was that second week of March 2020. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's honestly that's a pretty impressive timeline for typical, founders that we speak to spend like years developing and iterating and like finally getting to a version for retail. So really impressive for it sounds like it's like a year and a half. Late 2018 is when you started, March 2020 at Whole Foods. So that's I mean, I think that's a sign of your execution and the fact that the market was ready for this type of product. So kudos there.
Thank you. We have now evolved, the product that I launched in March 2020, we did a reformulation and a rebrand in the beginning of 2024. So the product that you see on shelf today is a little bit different, both, the brand itself, but also what's in the bag. So it was a good first attempt for those first 3 years, but it was far from perfect.
Sure, but it got you on shelf. It got you feedback from consumers, and it's part of the journey.
Absolutely.
It's you got to get started. You can make it perfect later. But on the funding side, so you were working part time as a lawyer. Were you self funding the first 2 years of the business? Did you do a friends and family round? How did you approach that? Just getting out of the gates.
Yeah, I did not fundraise or hire for the first 3 years. So it was just me, the lawyer mom with no CPG experience, stumbling around trying to figure out what turns out to be a very complicated and nuanced industry. So certainly think we probably could have grown a little faster in the beginning if I had put some resources around me. But it
Was
also,
that your intention? Did you mean to bootstrap it like that, or was it too difficult to raise?
yeah, no, I didn't try to raise. It was my intention. I just figured I had a lot to figure out, and before I felt comfortable taking in anybody else's money, like I wanted to figure some things out and make sure that this was a viable company and a viable product. So didn't bring in any outside capital until 2023. Started raising from friends and family and a couple of funds kind of that are really supportive of early stage founders based in Chicago. And then that early fundraise enabled me to make my first hires. So brought on marketing and sales at the same time. Figured, if I'm going to bring in somebody in sales who's going to get us on a bunch of shelves, I sure as heck better have somebody in marketing who can figure out how to turn us off those shelves. And that was an excellent decision. And so really started to build the foundation of our team in 2023. We rebranded, like I earlier alluded to, in 2024. That was a huge inflection point for us. The week, we had been on a really nice growth curve already, but if you look at our sales data, you can just see this sharp change in the curve when we rebranded. The week the new packaging showed up on shelf, our velocities jumped 62%. So it was just like an overnight, night and day change. And so we rebranded in 2024. We had this kind of new wave of momentum that kind of continued to snowball from there. And we were able to close our first institutional round later that summer.
Yeah. Wow. How long were you part time in law before you made the decision to make the jump to go full?
We were on shelves for 6 months at Whole Foods before I retired from the law. Call me a risk averse lawyer, but I was like, I just, want to make sure there are other people out there who want to buy this other than me and my family before I decide to make the leap.
Right. Wow. So it was a couple of years of you full time bootstrap before you even brought on the friends and family round in 2023. Yeah. It's yeah, I'd say it's not uncommon to hear that, but that's what I think is the most difficult part of this market is kind of staying alive in that realm while you build arguments and collect data for larger retailer rollouts. And I think you mentioned the rebrand driving your velocities through the roof, which is pretty insane to think about a sixty point increase in velocity from a rebrand. But that's, I mean, that's your best marketing is what you can, how you show up on shelf.
It's nuts. I obviously we thought it was going to be valuable, the rebrand, or else we wouldn't have gone. I mean, it's a lot of work to do a rebrand once you're, out in market, but never in a million years did I think it would have that big of an impact. But it really, I mean, we flipped the brand on its head. Our old packaging was a white package. Our logo was green, kind of block letters with sharp corners. And it really didn't, it was much more focused on the functionality. So, like, it called out that we had veggies, it called out that there was protein. We actually, we started this conversation talking about Expo West. We used Expo West 2023 as a way to do a really scrappy kind of consumer insights research project. And we asked everybody who came by the booth that year kind of what they thought about the brand. And the number one piece of feedback we heard over and over and over again was that people loved our waffles and they liked them so much more than they expected to. And we were like, we're thrilled you love the waffles, but also why did you not expect to like them? And they were like, I just like the packaging screams like too healthy. Like we thought they'd taste like cardboard. And so when we did the rebrand, we really wanted to make sure that, yeah, of course, important to call out what makes, the waffles themselves unique. We use hidden veggies. We have a really nice amount of naturally occurring protein. But to shift the narrative from like we're the healthiest frozen waffle to the way we describe it now is, we're craveable first and quietly nutritious behind the scenes. And so, we redid all of our photography to really emphasize the craveability. We changed the background is no longer white. They're these really bright, you can see behind me, really bright, kind of fun rainbow colors that you like. They're almost obnoxiously bright. You cannot miss them even behind a frosted freezer door. We changed the logo from those kind of sharp corners, kind of cold to round font because, like I said in the beginning, when I was talking about our sweatshirts, breakfast is full of hopefully like happy, warm memories of
Right.
childhood. And we wanted to really kind of channel that in our packaging and make people feel that emotion and feel that nostalgia.
Yeah. Great. So it sounds like you've taken on, is it three different rounds of funding and growing the business to where you have today?
Yeah, we did kind of friends and family and then our seed round and then we just closed our series A.
Okay. And for friends and family, I'd like to pause on this one for a second because we talked to a ton of founders at this space. In really, when you have not a ton of retail traction or data to build on, my advice is always you have to go to the people around you because they're going to bet on you
Mm-hmm.
ahead of the velocity data that a professional investor might lean on. So, would love to hear your experience on the friends and family side. Of course, you were building it for a few years before you brought on that capital, but yeah, talk to us about how that went and how you approached the friends and family round.
Yeah, I think that kind of what investors are looking for at every stage is very different. And the friends and family stage, it really is kind of belief in you as a founder. And it helped that I think we were in about 650 stores by the time I started raising from friends and family. A lot of the folks that I raised from were local, so they could see Evergreen in their Whole Foods. Like they knew it was a cool thing that I'd been working on. But I also made very clear, and this was important to me because they are friends and family. I was like, don't give me any money that you'll miss. like, like you might not ever get this back. I think what we're doing is cool. It seems to be working, but like you are my friends and family, so I just feel the need to give you that disclaimer. And fortunately was able to find enough people in my orbit who believed in me and thought what I was doing was cool, who wanted to take a chance on us.
Yeah, it's well said, and it certainly adds another element of pressure when you do bring on that capital. And I think I don't know if you want to return it more because they're friends and family. I'm sure you want to treat all of your investors great, but like I think about it from my perspective too on the fund side. And in raising our first fund, I have some family members that are involved in this because I don't like you. I don't come from venture capital, so it's just part of the necessary build of the journey, or else
Yeah.
you're not going to get going.
Yeah. No, I mean, at that stage, like we couldn't get institutional capital. We were too small. We didn't have access to syndicated data. I had only access to retailer data that gave it to us for free. So it wasn't enough for institutional investors. So I'm incredibly grateful to
Right.
those people who took a chance on us really early and just believed that I was going to put my head down and try my very best to build this thing and liked what they had seen so.
Yeah, and when you raised that friends and family round in 23, so I don't know if it was about a year after that you closed your seed round. Did you know that was the path? Had you set execution benchmarks with your initial investors that you were basically planning for the seed, or did that happen more naturally?
It happened more naturally. As you know, this is an expensive industry to be in, particularly when you're in the frozen supply chain. But it was, I started having conversations with institutional investors at Expo West 2024. A lot of things happened at Expo West. And as I said, we had just executed the rebrand. And so it was almost like we were introducing ourselves to institutional investors for the first time. That said, I did, and the advice I give to any founder who's thinking about fundraising or thinks they might need to fundraise at some point is start conversations with investors who are, a couple years down the road early, because one, it always takes longer to fundraise than you anticipate. And two, I just think it's so helpful to build relationships with folks before you need to ask them for anything, and build really kind of genuine, authentic relationships. And so I was talking with an investor friend at Expo this year who, never would have invested in us at the time, but the first conversation we had was back in 2021. And he's one of my closest investor friends. And so I just think that starting those relationships early is really valuable. So a lot of the people that we ended up talking to really seriously for our seed, I'd met years ago.
Yeah, I think as an investor, it's it's pretty impossible to meet a founder for the first time and invest without seeing the journey, or at least being a part of some of it. And I think all the founders that are in our world have the advantage of is the product. And you can sample product, you can get it in investor households
Mhm.
before they're ready, before you're ready to take on their money. And I think that's the best way, in my opinion, to start building those relationships is you put it in their fridge or put it in their freezer, and try to make it become a part of their routine, and then they're ready by the time
Mhm.
you're
Yeah.
ready.
No, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. And great. So the rebrand, it sounds like that helped on the fundraising side just as much as the retail side. And you brought on that seed, and that got you two more years of runway to the Series A. Or can you fill us in on
We
how that
raised the
bridge?
bridge in the middle of there. I will say too, before we get to Series A, I had said that, I think what investors are looking for at every stage is different. When we were raising our seed and talking to, true institutional investors, yes, they still need to believe in you as a founder, and that's a lot of it. But now they're looking for more actual data. And so we had just started to get access to Nielsen IQ data and to Spins data, and we were able to show, we've got these strong baseline velocities that, and here's our trajectory over the last few years. And so, our baseline velocities are strong, and the path suggests they're only going to continue to build on themselves. So, like at the Series seed round, like you do need the data to back it up, with the type of investors that you're talking to. But yeah, then we did a bridge round, the following year, and then at the end of just last year, we raised our Series A. So we just closed within the last couple of months here.
Yeah. Wow, it's quite the journey. And I don't know if how you think about the future and how much more money you'll need to get to whatever the end goal is, and would love to hear your take on that. But with the Series A, that was a substantial round. It was a 15 million round. Were these investors that you had built relationships with in the seed round, or the friends and family? How did you find? I think one of the hardest things is finding a lead investor,
Hmm.
and getting somebody to put in the largest check and set the terms, and really negotiate the deal for the follow on investors. So how are you able to execute that?
So not all of the 15.2 that was reported was new capital. Some of that was our bridge round that had converted. But our seed investor, lead investor, and our bridge lead investor ended up co-leading the Series A, which I loved because I've now had them around the board table for the last couple years. I know that we all work really well together. I know that we all have kind of complementary experiences and expertise, and that the dynamic of the boardroom is really productive. And so was very, very excited to have them lead. And then we brought on a couple new investors, who I had, one of which I'd been talking to for years. And so again, it just goes back to like our first conversation was probably several years ago. But we kind of kept in touch, and you never know when you're actually going to have an opportunity to work together. And then the second new investor was a brand new introduction over the last few months. So, investors look different and feel different, and come to you at different times throughout the journey.
Yeah. And as you look towards the future, and we can wrap on, would love your perspective on how you're
Hmm.
anticipating any future raises, if that is in the game plan. And yeah, why don't we start with that before we go to any closing advice?
There are differing opinions on on whether we'll need to raise again. This raise should bring us gives us a lot of runway, which is really exciting because I really like fundraising. And probably because I've had such incredible experiences with our investors. Um, I'll give a shout out to Mellitas and Terpsy are the two that led this round, and they've taught me so much. They have been incredible value add partners. I'm a much better founder, CEO for it. Our company is much better for it. And so when I go out and I am fundraising, I view every investor I talk to as a potential new partner, a potential new voice around the table who can bring something new to the business. But it does take a ton of time. I mean, I was thinking back to this fall, and like I had days where I had, 5 to 6 back-to-back calls with investors telling the same story over and over again, and needing it to feel like it was the first time I told it that day. And so it does distract you from building the company and building the brand. So very happy to have it done so that I can, again, put my head back down, and focus on building, and really be there for the rest of our team, and give them my full time and attention. I think never say never. While this round should give us quite a bit of runway, there may be, a need in the future to do a big brand awareness push, or perhaps we bring on, more new distribution than we've been anticipating. You never know. So, is it likely we may need to raise? Probably, but up in the air.
Yeah. Well done. You said something that really stood out to me there. You really like raising money in the fundraising process, which I don't think I've heard many founders say. So, I mean, it comes through, and I think you're great at the storytelling side of it, and clearly at building relationships. So I don't know how you've been able to put your perspective in that mode of like you're almost like appreciating the investment pitches, but yeah, if you could look back on your journey and maybe share some advice to founders that are raising today, what would be the top one or two things that come to your mind?
Um, like I said, start early. It always takes so much longer than you think it's going to take to get around closed, and you don't want to run out of money. So start early. Um, and also start, you know, take calls with investors who are much too big for you, because down the road, you never know. At some point, hopefully, you will be the right size for them. And if you build those relationships early, it's just a much easier conversation. And then I think the third thing, and I appreciate your comment, is just view investors as partners and coaches and teachers and people you can learn from and people who are really in it with you. I when we hit a speed bump, my investors are the first people I call. And they've said to me before, like, it's really nice that you think to call us. Like, not all founders do. I'm like, well, why else would I have you? Why else would I have you on the team if I didn't want to use you as a resource? A lot of these folks are incredibly experienced and have gone through everything an emerging brand could possibly be going through with another brand. And so use them as resources, lean on them. You should view them as your partners. And sitting on the same side of the table as you, not the other side. So hopefully
Right.
that's
And
helpful.
it's helpful. I would say it's probably easier said than done. So on the second point on getting investors to take calls with you before you're really in their realm, does anything tactical come to mind on how you were able to do that?
I think that, hopefully a lot of those requests will be inbound. If you're building something that folks are excited about. So I'd say, like, don't say no. There were times when I just felt so busy and I wasn't fundraising, and I'd get a, inquiry coming in, and I'd look at their website and be like, no way they're going to invest in Evergreen right now. They're like 5 years down the road. I always did my best, and found time to get on a call with them, even though it didn't feel like it was like the most important thing to do right in that moment. Just make time for those conversations. But then
Were you going outbound as well?
outbound, some, yes. It's funny. Like, sometimes I'll look back at really old emails and I'm like, oh man, I remember those just outbound. I'm a big fan of cold emails. So I sent a lot of outbounds. Don't get discouraged if they're not responded to. I have many, 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 many that were not responded to. And then, down the road, that same fund is sent an inbound. And so it's just, um, I think that's the other thing that's most important for brands to keep in mind as they're going through fundraising. You're going to get so many no's. I've gotten so many no's in the life cycle of Evergreen, and it doesn't mean it's no forever. It's no comment even on you or your brand. It's just no today. It could be because of where the fund is in the life cycle of their fund, or maybe they're fundraising, and they're not deploying capital, whatnot. You can't take it personally. Don't let it get under your skin. Just keep your chin up and keep going.
Perfectly said.